Welcome to Boil the Frog Slowly, a radio program dedicated to the question, are politics hazardous to your health? I am Pat.
And I'm Sebastian, and the honor is all mine to be here on this fantastic show.
And I have to ask the question, Sebastian, do you know of any other radio program that is addressing questions concerning the health hazards proliferated by political agendas?
No, not that I know of.
All right.
It's a beautiful thing.
I don't either. Questions pertaining to health issues caused by smart meters, addictive cellular technology, radio frequencies, smart grids, mandatory vaccines, Wi-Fi in schools, and even something as environmental sounding as the extinction of the good old incandescent light bulb. You don't typically hear about the health side of this. Occasionally, the media talks about the loss of liberty, freedom, and privacy, but rarely does anyone address the damaging health effects. And there is a history of well-researched documentation to back up these health concerns.
Absolutely.
However, mainstream does not seek to share. So as we slowly boil amidst these gradual changes, we fail to ask who is making these decisions to promote environmental health hazards under the guise of global sustainability, and for what purpose? So Sebastian, you and I, and Boil the Frog Slowly, will gig out these issues to help everyone understand, function, and ultimately survive in today's toxic environment proliferated by big you-know-what. All right, we ready to go?
All right.
So grab a pen and paper if you like, sit back for the entire show, and get serious with me. Because now it's time for Pat's POV, and that's my point of view. So here's my 50 cents worth. I've been traveling a lot this month and have so much to tell you. Recently, Bob and I drove to Chicago to attend the Barrel Institute's Patient Experience Conference. It was a 4-day event, and I was asked to come to interview all of the sponsors, speakers, and attendees. It was quite a personal way to meet people, and out of 700 folks, I really did get to speak to most of them. During each interview, I purposely asked the question, what does the patient experience mean to you? And wow, the answers in every case were honest, heartfelt, filled with emotion. Some were, quite frankly, still raw from having recently experienced a personal or family hospital encounter. But what I came away with is an appreciation that most hospitals and most healthcare providers are truly concerned and interested to create a positive patient experience. Now, if you'd like to hear the audio from that event, it's posted on our website, speakupandstayalive.com. I think you'll get a lot out of it. Well, I know I did. So that part of the trip was quite positive. The only drawback was the city of Chicago, like all cities anymore, is heavily radiated by cell towers. I know this because I have a measuring device called an acoustometer that accurately detects the levels of radio frequencies. It's sad to see totally unaware people going about their business not knowing that their bodies are subjected to high levels of unhealthy and unnatural radiation. Well, from Chicago, we drove to Denver for my daughter's baby shower. Now, you would think that driving across a state such as Iowa, you would find little, if any, man-made radiation. I have to tell you that my mind was blown to find that while driving across the state on Route 80, that there was a giant, monstrous cell phone tower about every half mile. Actually, I was so aghast that I grabbed a piece of paper while driving and wrote this: "The farmers are selling out." A disturbing juxtaposition of peaceful, idyllic farmland, pastures, cows, amber waves of grain, marred by the evil looming towers of death and destruction. Yes, cows grazing in fields directly under the ever-radiating cell phone towers. Perhaps the marketing spin will be, our cows are pre-cooked. I'm still wondering why we need that many cell towers in a location with perhaps, 3 people per mile? Or is it a bigger plan? Then on to Denver. In Colorado in general, my meter indicated high levels of radiation no matter where we went. In town, out of town. In fact, we stayed at a campground in our RV in hopes of avoiding big town radiation. Oh, that's right. Without a meter, you wouldn't know that many motels and hotels house cell towers within their signs, disguised as flagpoles or hidden within fake boulders. Yet this state campground was no better. Sorry, the meter got to work out there. And I almost have to laugh at the hypocrisy. Colorado folks, for the most part, like to think they're big environmentalists and health conscious. People ride bikes, people are running, they eat nuts and fruits. They're big on protecting our natural resources. So it came as no surprise to find that the showers at this state campground were metered. 50 cents bought 3 minutes of water. Yep, we had to bring quarters to the bathroom in order to take a shower. Now, did you ever try to wash your hair in less than 3 minutes? And in cool water? But hey, gotta protect the disappearing supply of water, and what a better way to do it than charge the vacationers and tourists? Shameful people using water to take a shower? Where do they come from? But here's where the hypocrisy comes in. The people, the parks, the powers that be are so concerned that someone might abuse a shower, yet the entire park is under siege with health-damaging radio frequencies. Frequencies that are silently changing all living things. The innocent campers who think they're experiencing a holistic encounter with nature. The magpies, the rabbits, the trees, the bugs. I hate to say this, but lack of water will be the least of our troubles once all of this man-made, corporate proliferated radiation catches up with us. And I feel like a loner. I've done the research. I have the foresight to see what's on the horizon. But no one else does, or if they do, they don't seem to care. It's called willful blindness. And no one in charge is looking out for us. The electromagnetic radiation standards used by the FCC continue to be based on thermal heating, a criterion now, 30 years out of date, and obviously no longer applicable today. Unless you think otherwise, the FCC is not a health agency. The FCC is a government agency wearing two hats, implementing wireless at breakneck speed while retaining control over obsolete, non-protective guidelines that should be regulated and overseen by a legitimate environmental health agency. I think it's time to examine the cozy love affair between industry and government when it no longer serves the public good and directly contributes to the public harm. Doctors and healthcare providers don't yet recognize or acknowledge the very real symptoms of people who outwardly react to this assault on our bodies. And my guest today has something further to say about all of this. So here's my 50 cents worth. And no, not for shower water. The precautionary principle is warranted here. We need to wake up, people, before we let an industry jeopardize our health, our children's health, and humanity. Hey, Bob, got another quarter? Today, we have a special guest with us to talk about people who are physically sickened by their exposure to wireless technology. And we've talked many times before on this program about the health hazards associated with cell phones, smart meters, cell towers. So today, we have as our guest Kim Goldberg. She is an award-winning writer in Nanaimo, British Columbia. She is the author of 6 books and more than 2,000 articles. Kim has been awarded a grant from the Canada Council for the Arts to write a book about people who are and have felt the negative effects because of their exposure to wireless technology. Her new book, Refugium, will be published in 2015 and tells the stories of electrosensitive people. Kim holds a degree in biology from University of Oregon and is an avid bird watcher and nature lover. There is lots more to know about this fascinating woman, and I think it best that you hear it all from her. So welcome to the show, Kim.
Thank you very much for having me on, Pat.
It is my pleasure. So we're going to just dig right in, and I'd like you to tell us a little bit about why you find yourself writing such a book, and it's called Refugium, Wi-Fi, Exiles, and the Coming Electroplague. Lots of interesting words there. So tell us how and why you're writing this and what Refugium means.
I'll start with what refugium means, actually. It's a term from biology, and since I am a biologist by training, that vocabulary is always just sort of floating around in my head, and what I'm using to connect metaphorically to the situation our culture now finds itself in. In biology, a refugium is an area, a geographical area, that has somehow escaped changes that are occurring elsewhere, and it thereby provides suitable habitat in which organisms can survive through periods of unfavorable conditions. So the Ice Age, various refugia were created or existed during the Ice Age. So some species managed to survive the last glaciation 10,000 years ago because they happened, fortunately for them, to be located in refugia. Well, I'm just very interested in this concept as a metaphor for the situation we're now in, where we have so severely, our civilization has come to a point of poisoning not only itself, but really the whole planet. And what we're seeing, particularly with the problem of electrosensitivity in people, is that people are needing to go out and create sanctuaries, create safe havens, create refugia, which is a very difficult thing to do in our world. We're so heavily connected with wireless technologies, it's almost inescapable, but not entirely inescapable. So I got into this project partly by being very fascinated, almost from a philosophical or an anthropological perspective, of this society, a culture that has done this to itself, that is basically killing itself, and now has sort of a front guard fanning out, trying to locate or create these refugia.
Very, very interesting. So as just a normal person, do you find that you've been affected by these electromagnetic radiation fields that are all around us?
In my own case, not really. I don't consider myself electrosensitive, although I personally have had some problems with all my long hours at the computer, and that's affecting me more in terms of magnetic fields that come from the computer. So I've sort of redesigned in my own home office. I've redesigned my computer system so the hardware is further away. I have longer cords, things like that. I personally have not experienced a reaction to wireless technologies. That not a reaction that I'm aware of. But, the reality, and this is, definitions and labels get so tricky, who's electrosensitive and who isn't. The reality is we are all electrosensitive. It's just some of us, some people, and not me, are painfully aware of it. But we're all electrosensitive because, obviously, we're all bioelectrical organisms. Our entire being, 24/7, is operating on the most minute, subtle bioelectrical currents all the time. Our brains, our hearts, our tissues, our nervous system. And so if you thrust such a bioelectrical organism into the midst of a much denser and more potent artificially induced electromagnetic field, well, of course that's going to have a disruptive effect on the organism. So we really all are electrosensitive in that we're all responding at some level to this massive electromagnetic field that we're unfortunately all immersed in now. My interest, how I personally came to the point of saying, gosh, there's a book here and I want to write it, it all had to do with the battle over smart meters, which, of course, has been rolled out everywhere now across the continent practically, certainly in every state and all of the provinces here in Canada. And as this was unfurling here in BC, a very, very strong and well-organized resistance to smart meters developed here, thank goodness. And so a lot of us have managed, through a huge amount of fighting, to keep smart meters off of our homes, or at least a number of us have. And there are now 2 class action lawsuits pending in BC against BC Hydro over this. But in the course of being part of that battle, that now 2 years and running battle against smart meters here in BC, I came in contact with and began to hear all of these stories about severely electrosensitive people. In some cases, they were people who were electrosensitive prior to smart meters, and in some cases, it was people who had led completely normal lives without any medical problems and then became enormously, devastatingly sick immediately after smart meter installation. So I was hearing stories of a school teacher in Vancouver who now has to sleep in a car in her driveway because she can no longer sleep in her bedroom, or an elderly woman in a condominium who is now confined to a wheelchair because the entire building's 24 smart meters were put opposite her bedroom wall, or a musician in Vancouver who is just devastatingly ill and ultimately had to move out of her home because of a smart meter and has never recovered her health. All of these stories kept coming to my attention as I was involved in this organized resistance in D.C. against smart meters, until I finally just realized, well, this is ridiculous. There's a book here in telling these stories, and it would actually be very useful to put a human face on this plight of electrosensitivity, because simply presenting more and more evidence, more and more data, more and more peer-reviewed scientific reports, there's no shortage of science, that isn't convincing people. And so it doesn't seem to be achieving what those of us who already understand these risks think that this presentation of evidence should achieve. So I thought, well, here's another approach. Let's humanize it. Let's tell the stories of people living with electrosensitivity. So that was really sort of the origin of this Refugium book I'm now working on.
Wow, and that makes perfect sense. You're absolutely right. There is no shortage of scientific evidence. And more people are realizing, or hopefully they're realizing, what their symptoms are coming from. And I want to just circle back to what you just said a few moments ago about the label, because I've been thinking about that in great detail lately. We just interviewed a gentleman in Israel, and the first thing he said is that I am an EHS person. And I thought, to label someone as an electrosensitive person, it almost makes it sound like that person has something wrong with them.
Exactly. There's a blaming the victim component to the label itself. And I, as a writer, am wrestling with this a lot, and I have not yet, although I'm still on my website using the term EHS and electrosensitive and electrohypersensitive, I haven't yet decided how I'm going to handle that in the book, because I very much believe we do create our reality by our choice of language, and because language steers our thinking, and I completely have problems with that label. It suggests that the problem rests with the individual who is somehow too sensitive. Well, no, that's not the problem. The problem is the environmental biotoxin that is diminishing all of us, and that some people are more consciously aware of at this point than others.
I'm really thrilled that we're having this conversation, because as I was thinking about speaking with you today, I knew that I wanted to bring this up, and I was hoping that I wasn't going to offend you by saying that I really am scared to use the word electrosensitive. And I was trying to think, well, what would my alternative be? And so far I came up with electro-aware person.
That's a good phrase, and I think I've even heard other people say that. This is something in all the dialogue I've now been having with electrosensitive people, to use the word, since I haven't yet figured out another word. This point has been raised more than once, and some people are very resistant to that label for this very right reason, that there is a blaming the victim component to it. I think that's a really interesting idea. In fact, I'm jotting that term down. I think I've jotted it down before, because other people have also selected that or similar labels as an alternative. By the way, is very interesting in all of this. Facebook is both boon and bane to all of us for so many reasons, but it's paradoxical almost in a way that the greatest base of support groups anywhere in the world, and that is really having a profound positive effect on the lives of many people who are electro-aware or electrosensitive, is on Facebook. It's many online electrosensitivity support groups on Facebook that have literally saved people from suicide, and that is not an exaggeration, that's not hyperbole. I have seen more than one person post in these groups that if it hadn't been for discovering whichever group they're in on Facebook, they would have committed suicide by now. And certainly there are, unfortunately, already too many cases of electro-aware people who have committed suicide because they can find no relief from their suffering and torment.
That's so true. I know so many people, and the more I get involved in this work, the more I find. And just myself, I don't have a serious problem with it, but I do feel when I'm around cell phone towers or in buildings with Wi-Fi, I start to get that tingling feeling on the top of my head. And we're going to be traveling across country, and We actually bought a cargo trailer to pull behind the van so that we could sleep in that at night, because now you've got all that metal that pretty much shields it. And then I bought shielding material for it, because there's no way I'm going to pull into a motel or a hotel on the road that probably has a cell phone tower stashed somewhere in its canopy that you don't
or
see.
Or probably has Wi-Fi in every room. You
know. And isn't it a shame that we are forced to do these type of things just to survive?
Oh, I know. That's another part of all my research into this that's fascinating me, and that I'm trying to get into in the book, is the survival strategies. What it says about our culture and our society, that individuals have to go to this, but also it's such an interesting look at the ingenuity and courage of people who are in such desperate straits, and the homemade Faraday cages that they come up with. And I know quite a few people who, when they go on long-distance car drives, they will wear a shielding veil specifically over their head. There are people who report simply putting a cook pot, like a 2-quart saucepan cook pot, on their head for protective effect, shielding when in a car or some situation where they have no other, or even in their own home if a problem with neighbors and their wireless devices becomes too great. Just the extent that people have to go to get some relief.
Yeah, you got to do what you have to do, which takes me to a quote I found on your website. You say, "Where do you go when an invisible matrix spanning the globe is making you sick?"
Well, and that really is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yes.
And so this is what's so interesting. Even in just the 18 months or so that I have been intensively researching this and contacting people, I have seen the situation go from only a handful of known and identified sanctuaries, the world over for electro-aware people. I've seen all sorts of little groups and cohorts of people forming, like even right now today in this week, attempting to lease property in rural Massachusetts, buy property in northern British Columbia to form these sanctuaries. So I think what we're going to see, in answer to that question that's on my website, where do you go when an invisible matrix spanning the globe is making you sick? I think what we're going to see in the next 5 years and 10 years for sure, is a huge outpouring of these little pockets, these little refugia that have been located or created all over the world. Some of them will be formalized, and some of them will just be known by word of mouth, and people who need the safe haven will find their way to them. If anybody, listening to this wants to know, there is one forming right now, a small group of people hoping to form a fairly permanent refuge in rural western Massachusetts, but they're hoping to get tenants beginning in May. And so it's all about financing, finding the people who want and need this kind of place and who are ready to relocate and put their rent money there instead of into some toxic condo in a city that's killing them. It's all about kind of getting the right people connected together. So, and there's another effort just like that assembling itself right now in British Columbia. So Facebook is a good place to go for these things, and the various support groups on Facebook.
Interesting. All right, I might have you send us some of those specific names, and we can post them on our website.
That.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Now, I know there's a safe havens, so to speak, in West Virginia, or in Virginia here in the States.
Right, Green Bank, West Virginia, probably the most famous one, and it's so ironic because it's such a little town. Nobody had ever heard of it before 2011, when I think BBC wrote an article on this, wrote or broadcast a story on this, and then everybody's done it since. I'm one of the very few people who knew about Green Bank, West Virginia, which I think has a total population of 143 people or something. Before that, because my uncle is the former director of the National Radio Astronomy Observatory at Green Bank. So I had grown up knowing about and always hearing about Green Bank, West Virginia, which very few people can claim they have. But it's precisely because of that National Radio Astronomy Observatory that Green Bank is a safe haven to the extent that it is. And I'm told that that's declining all the time now, that more wireless technology has gone in. But Green Bank is part of the U.S. National Radio Quiet Zone because the radio telescope at Green Bank needs to listen to sounds from outer space, and so there cannot be wireless radio chatter going on in close proximity, or it will be disruptive and will swamp the signals being listened to from far away. So it's ironic, really, that the science at its pinnacle has ended up creating a haven for people who need a refuge from science and technology. But that's what's happened really with Green Bank, and people, extremely electrosensitive or electro-aware people, have moved there over the years. My guess would be that Green Bank is still far, far lower in terms of density of radio frequency transmissions than and wireless transmissions than other places.
That's interesting that we're going to see more and more of these popping up.
Oh, I'm sure we are, and I hear about it all the time. And people, sometimes with very grandiose plans to build and start large sanctuaries, and other times it's just 2 or 3 desperately ill, electro-aware people saying, "Look, if we can find a place to rent out in the boondocks, we're there, we're gone, we'll go do it." And so that's one of the things that these Facebook online support groups is actually facilitating. It's putting very sick people in touch with each other who would never otherwise come in contact, and they see, well, you know what, we could pool our resources, go rent that log cabin on 100 acres off-grid out in the middle of nowhere, and heal our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So that's a really interesting pattern that's developing, and I think what we're going to see from that is more and more formalized sanctuaries and refuges developing. The one that's just starting to form in rural West Virginia, and I will send you a contact name and email address for that you might be able to circulate. They, for example, want to have a permanent not only refuge, but a medical clinic as well, and they already have medical practitioners lined up for the months of May and June to treat whatever electro-aware people come to the facility, come to the space, so to live and recover. So it's a great plan, and I think we're really going to be seeing more of that, unfortunately. I mean, it's our own culture and civilization and addiction to wireless devices that has brought us to this point.
And speaking of the medical side of that, that's interesting that that's popping up as well, because conventional medical system, they have no idea when they're trying to diagnose a symptom or an issue. They're going to point you in all different directions, which is going to take you to drugs and unnecessary testing and, just spiral downwards.
Absolutely.
And no one's going to really realize that these are the symptoms of EHS and here's what you need to do. And secondly, you go to a hospital to recover, and now they're handing everyone iPads. And my daughter's having a child, her first child this spring, and she already told me, they're going to put an RFID bracelet on her ankle and clip one to the placenta. I'm like, who stands a chance now? So now you can't even, the doctors don't even know what they're looking for. And when you do go there, you're just going to get worse due to all the wireless in the hospital. So
that's absolutely true. Hospitals are really literally one of the worst places you can go in terms of density of wireless radiation.
Right.
And it's just horrific. And when you think of prenatal wards and neonatal wards, it's just it's really horrifying what's happening.
So maybe we will see a whole healthcare outcropping of folks that are aware and maybe create medical practices specifically for this problem, because it's definitely going to become a huger problem.
Definitely, and I think absolutely. There's these European researchers in an oft-quoted study. They put forward their evidence for their prediction that by the year 2017, and let's face it, we're coming up pretty close to that, 50% of the population will be electrosensitive, as in aware of the fact that they have a health impact because of this, or as opposed to the rest of us who our health is being impacted, our blood, for everybody, whether we know it or not, when we're around this stuff, our red blood cells are clumping together, the blood-brain barrier in our head is being compromised and eroded, and various neurological consequences are happening to us as well, whether we actually are consciously aware this is happening to everybody. And so, yes, I think the medical profession is just going to have to get with the program, and they already, a few doctors here and there are, and I think what we might see is a tipping point, a 100th monkey sort of situation where after a certain number of doctors get this figured out and start advocating on the issue, then all of a sudden the whole medical profession will get behind it, and it will be just like with so many other toxins that were not initially recognized, everything from tobacco to asbestos to heavy mercury to heavy metals, that now the entire medical community understands that this is unacceptable, and they need to be able to diagnose it accurately in their patients and caution against it. I am finding doctors, more and more doctors here and there, are aware of the problem, and some are even contacting me. A UK doctor contacted me to see if I knew of any sanctuaries in England because she wants to be able to direct her electrosensitive patients to a safe place they can go. And just the summer before last, here in Canada, the Women's College Hospital in Toronto was the first medical institution in Canada to go on record saying electromagnetic hypersensitivity is real, and family doctors all across Canada need to learn to recognize its symptoms so that they can diagnose it accurately in their patients. Now, that was actually quite huge for a medical institution in Canada to come out with that statement, but I think it's been largely forgotten now, unfortunately.
Well, we're kind of behind the times here, I think, in the United States, because I interview many doctors for my program, and when I bring it up, they shut me down like some kind of a kook. So I haven't come across too many people that really want to embrace this. But the only good news in what you're saying about 50% of the folks becoming aware that they have this sensitivity by 2017 is that maybe then we can do something about it quickly.
Well, you'd think. I mean, if half the population is struggling to the point that they will find it difficult to work and difficult to be functional in society, that's obviously going to have an impact. And you would think the medical profession will, get on board with this, and we would hope sooner rather than later. I will say that in what I've discovered in all of my reading, the United States is the worst country for recognizing the reality of the risks of electromagnetic radiation, and specifically the reality of the biological and health risks of wireless technology. Every country, including even Canada, is further ahead, is less resistant, is more likely to have more medical professionals and more scientists at least willing to look at the data than the U.S. And in trying to analyze why that is, and of course some European countries are actually quite forward-thinking and have put out real precautions and warnings, to their whole population against Wi-Fi in schools, Wi-Fi in libraries, use of cell phones, and the U.S. has been the most consistently retrograde on this, and I can only think it is because the Internet and telecommunications industry is primarily headquartered in the U.S. That isn't to say they don't have companies and offices in other countries, but the guts of it is and always will be, I suspect, in the United States. And so, of course, the Internet and telecommunications industry is an enormously powerful, well-funded, organized, unified body in terms of that has great potential to lobby and dictate political decision-making and, in fact, thinking among the scientific and medical community. And so I think that's why the U.S. is really behind every other country in the world in terms of being able to look honestly and openly at these risks.
No, I agree with you. I mean, we always say follow the money. I mean, what are the larger forces that are driving this proliferation of wireless technology? And it always boils down to money. And then the second problem is the media. You've got, all your media is owned by 5 corporations. It's all corporate-owned media, so you only hear what somebody wants you to hear, that they're getting paid to tell you. So between the two of them, you hardly stand a chance to make any inroads. And then they're
going to have interlocking board of directors, the major media corporations and the major internet and telecommunications industries. So it's pretty difficult to overcome that in the U.S., where this whole thing really is. The whole internet telecommunications industry is headquartered.
Right. It's like a revolving door. The one goes out one door, and then they get elected to be in another door, and they bring their biases and their preferences and their lobbyists with them. And so how can you fight that?
Absolutely. But, there are, in the U.S., there are various attempts to do some sanctuaries. There's a whole community in Arizona, Snowflake, Arizona, that's for multiple chemical sensitivity people and electrical sensitivity or electro-aware people. And that's actually a residential community of sorts. In Rockvale, Colorado, a person has started the Electromagnetic Sensitivity Research Institute, which will, when it's completed, also have housing and cabins specifically for electrosensitive people to come. A fellow in Grass Valley, California, has created the Silent Dome, which could at some point become an electrosensitive residence. Many of these things are in the planning stage. They're great ideas, but haven't yet achieved critical mass. So I think as more and more people need them, more and more such places will crop up until it will become quite impossible for even this well-funded, powerful lobby group to say, nope, none of these risks are real, our technology is safe, all of these people are lunatics. You can't really say that when it's 50% of the population that you're calling lunatics.
That's very true. We found that with our public officials and our representatives, try to reach out to them, especially with the smart meters, and to take it to the House of Representatives. And even the folks that want to be interested in it still just don't get it. They're looking at the privacy side of smart meters. And when you try to entertain the thought that this radio frequencies are not helpful to our health, and then you pull out all of the studies and send them email links, and it still just doesn't seem to sink in.
And it's not like our government doesn't know, and at the very highest level. It's not like there's just even what could be called willful ignorance. The government absolutely knows. I have actually in front of me right now, I have a 116-page report from the U.S. Navy, the Naval Medical Research Institute, going all the way back to 1971. So we are talking decades and decades ago. This was prepared for the Navy, and it is a bibliography, over 100 pages, of all of the then-known scientific papers of reported biological phenomena and clinical manifestations attributed to microwave and radio frequency radiation. And I mean, really, this is including everything from convulsions and liver enlargement to blood and bone changes, scalp sensations, irritability, myocardial necrosis. It's an enormous list of articles and just an enormous multi-page list of known consequences of this exposure. All of this compiled by the U.S. Navy and now declassified, available to anybody, all done back in 1971. So in terms of what did the government know and when did they know it, well, they know it all, and they've known it for decades. So it almost just makes a mockery of this effort of activists to feed one more piece of evidence after another to government authorities to try to convince them. They don't need to be convinced. They've already amassed the evidence for themselves governmentally decades ago. And it's just, it's really quite shameful how this assault on human and all organic life has been allowed to unfold over the decades.
Well, they're part of it as well. I mean, they've got children and grandchildren and future generations. So what are people thinking? Yeah. What is the end game plan? Why is this allowed to, be ignored and, most importantly, be covered up? I mean, there's been many Motorola report with Dr. George Carlo that got shut down. I mean, there's documentation out there that gets squashed, studies get defunded. There's a real purpose behind moving so quickly. There's cell towers being thrown up you drive down the street tomorrow and you'll see something you didn't see today. So
absolutely,
this is not an accident. I mean, there is a purpose, and I would be interested to know, what that purpose is, because they're involved in it as well.
Well, I agree. I would be interested to know as well. I ponder this all the time, trying to figure out what really is the end game on all of this. And certainly this technology is just being rolled out at a frightening rate now, and the desire to get these WiMAX hotspots in everywhere, get every city fully hotspotted, and then there really won't be any place to go, at least in cities. And even here in Nanaimo, where I live, which is a relatively small community on Vancouver Island, population of 80,000, we've got our cable company uniting with the city now to very proudly make sure that Wi-Fi is fully available in all city parks, all of our natural spaces, so there actually won't really be any escape. And in fact, the electrosensitive stories that I've been gathering from people who live here in Nanaimo, for example, and this is replicated everywhere else, many of them, their only refuge that they have, because they live in houses or worse yet, apartments or condos right in town, their refuge is that every day they spend an hour or two in a forested city park near the water. That's their only recovery and their only relief from what would otherwise be unremitting exposure to wireless radiation and the tremendous pain and distress it causes them. So now, the city, partnered with our cable company, has found a way to remove even those safe havens, and I believe that this is a scenario being played out everywhere.
Yes, it is. What is your situation with BC Hydro and the smart meters? Where do you guys stand with that?
Well, it's been a really long, hard battle with BC Hydro saying for many months, more than a year, you're all getting smart meters. There's no way out of it. But it's been fought and fought. And so now, finally, BC Hydro has given a so-called kind of semi-phony opt-out in which those of us who've somehow managed to retain our analog meters, and thank God I've managed to on my own home, if we pay them $35 a month
extortion,
as a so-called meter reading charge, even though they are not reading our meters, they're estimating everything, and they are reading the meters of people who have smart meters because they don't have the system fully, they don't have all their collectors in place to receive the data at head office or whatever, even though the meters are transmitting like crazy, so everybody with a smart meter on their home is being irradiated, but still a meter reader is being sent around to read the ridiculous thing. So it's ridiculous. So there is a legal effort to get that ridiculous $35 a month opt-out fee pertaining here in British Columbia, eliminated or substantially reduced. But even with this so-called opt-out now available, and so many of us claiming it, we still have the installers behaving like thugs and coming illegally onto people's property, refusing to leave, and swapping out meters wherever they can. So BC Hydro is just determined. The utility company has just been horrific in this, and I've heard of so many cases of this in all the other jurisdictions. The utility companies have just become bully boys and thugs in vandalizing, trespassing, abusing, harassing all of their customers. So, and BC Hydro is no different in that regard.
Interesting. We just interviewed Jerry Day from freedomtaker.com. Are you familiar with him?
Yes, I am, because he has one of his many videos is on how to change, how to remove your smart meter and put an analog meter back on the side of your house. And I've posted a link to his video on my own blog because I think that's really useful information, although I'm only aware of a single person in British Columbia who's done that, and BC Hydro cut her power. So, but nevertheless, I admire Jerry Day for making that information available to the world. This is the problem with these utility corporations and the rollout of the smart grid, is that they have just superseded all national and constitutional law everywhere and have just become a power unto themselves. They are so determined that their jurisdiction will be smart gridded. And even this is just baffling to me. We were talking earlier, well, what is the end game to all of this wireless everything? It's hard for me to understand this with the smart grid because all national security interests and military interests are very clear that the smart grid is enormously vulnerable. Like the military does not support the idea of a global smart grid or even a national smart grid. And national security interests do not support it and have spoken out vociferously against it. The former head of the CIA has spoken out vociferously against it because of its extreme and uncorrectable vulnerability, basically it could lead an entire nation to collapse. Really, if the grid goes down all at once, everywhere, and an entire country of the size of the United States, or Canada for that matter, has no electricity for a prolonged period of time, it's complete social economic chaos, leaving the country completely vulnerable to forces from within or externally that no military could protect against. And so, when even the military is speaking against smart gridding, whose interests are really being served, and what is it that is driving this juggernaut forward?
Absolutely. There's a grander plan by a small group, I'm sure, and it's not serving anyone well, and it's going to be very interesting and sad to see how this plays out.
Yeah.
Well, then let me ask you, where can our listeners find out more about you and your important work?
Well, I think the best place to send people at this point is my website, which is simply, they can Google the word Refugium, and if that isn't enough to get them there, they might try Refugium Kim Goldberg, and that, in theory, will land them right on my Refugium website. Refugium is the name of my book that's will be out next year in 2015, but it's also the name of my website. I'm posting a fair amount of information up there, and most importantly, I'm posting up there all of the stories of electrosensitive people that will also be included in my book. There will be other information in my book as well, and that might not be on the website, but at least the case studies and stories of people living with electrosensitivity or electro-awareness, those are all up on the website and can be read now, and I'm adding more to them all the time. I also am keeping a list of sanctuaries that I can find anywhere in the world on my website, and I'm very interested in increasing that list. So if anybody knows of any place they'd like to have added. I even have a B&B in England that asked to be added because they're offering electrosafe stays for people. So it doesn't need to be a formal, long-term, permanent sanctuary. I think it's valuable at this point to list any place that is a safe haven for electro-aware people. I would love to have people contact me if they know of any place in the world that could be added to my sanctuaries list.
Excellent. May I post some of your links on our site back to your website so our folks can go back and
Yes, that would be wonderful. I'd love to have that happen.
Excellent, excellent. Well, you have 2 additional websites, and I read a haiku on one of yours, and I have to say this one because I just loved it. Collection agency phone call, its weight lifted by the hawk on my way home. Oh, I just loved that one.
Well, thank you very much. I should tell listeners I'm also a poet.
Yes.
I've worked as a journalist, as a freelance investigative journalist for decades, really, since about 1978, and 4 of my 6 books are nonfiction books on subjects arising from all of my journalism reporting. But my other 2 books are poetry books, and so I'm a poet as well. And yes, my other 2 websites, I have a Pig Squash Press website, which is about all sorts of literary goings-on. And then I'm very much a student of Chinese martial arts and the Taoist internal arts, specifically an obscure martial art known as Luho Bafa. And so my 3rd website, Ride Backwards on Dragon, is about that whole practice of Taoist internal alchemy, Taoist metaphysics, martial arts, Chinese internal medicine, and traditional medicine. That's all housed on that website, and it arose from one of my poetry books, Ride Backwards on Dragon.
Oh, you were just such a cool lady. I'm so proud and happy to have met you and make you and your websites available to our listeners as well. Well, before we go today, do you have any final words of advice?
Well, I think people need to do whatever they can to get wireless technology at least out of their lives and out of their homes. I myself, I'm 59 years old. I've lived my entire life without ever owning any wireless devices or ever having any in my home or on my property. That means I've never had a cell phone, a cordless phone, no computer Wi-Fi, no microwave oven, no wireless mouse and keyboard, and no smart meter on my home. So I'm not saying this to say how virtuous I am, but really that it's perfectly doable. I've got everything I need in my life. I'm quite technically savvy and capable. I'm on my computer all the time, but it's hardwired. My phone is hardwired. I cook everything on a normal stove, not a microwave oven. There's many other reasons besides the wireless radiation for getting this crap out of our lives, the wireless crap. Microwave food is very damaged nutritionally, so you're helping yourself and your body and your families in many ways to divest yourself of whatever wireless devices are in your home. And I can tell you it's no hardship whatsoever to live without that stuff. So that would really be my first word of advice for everybody, is get back to, at least in your own home environment and your work environment as well, if you have that much control over your work environment, get back to hardwired connections on all of your equipment.
Excellent advice. I talk about that all the time. I finally did that within my own home, and I have to say how much better I feel by using the Ethernet connection and a wired mouse, and everything's pushed as far away from me as possible, and just shut down the wireless, no microwave. And yeah, you notice that you feel better.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I would expect that, even though I've never been bombarded with that stuff. This may be why I myself am not
Yes.
aware of being sensitive to those frequencies. I've really never had long-term close-up exposure because I've lived my life without having them in my life.
Right, and that's what it is. It's a cumulative effect and what other things that you've been, toxins from our food and those type of
Right.
things. So, well, Kim, it has certainly been my pleasure to get to know you, and we need more people like you to spread the word about basically our future. And I'm hoping that you'll come back sometime and share some more information with us.
I would love to do that, Pat, and thank you so much for having me on today.
It is my pleasure. Well, today we delved a little deeper into the upcoming global health hazard, radiation from wireless technology, cell towers, smartphones, smart meters. Each and every one of us must do something on a daily basis to reach out to someone else, to write and call our legislatures, to boycott those businesses who think it's safe and right to erect cell towers on their property with no regard for the negative health effects they have on innocent people, to educate our healthcare professionals, to insist that our schools and libraries and parks provide safe, radiation-free havens for those of us not willing to sacrifice our health for unproven technology. And no, I certainly am not a kook or a conspiracy theorist. I'm simply trying to be as informed and wary as possible, using the precautionary principle to guide my thinking and action. And as a listener of this program, I know that you live by those guidelines too. So let's reach out together and do something while there's still a fighting chance. Well, thank you for joining us on Boil the Frog Slowly Radio. Please come back next week. And for more information, go to the website, boilthefrogradio.com. And until next week, remember to practice safe phone.
Boil the frog slowly, you're a frog in a pot. Turn up the heat and things will get hot. Will you jump out or will you burn? Listen to the show and you will return to Boil the Frog Slowly.